Content Alchemists, and welcome back to another episode. And today we have another awesome guest, and the theme is centered around diversity, inclusion, and making sure you have the right people on your team with diverse voices being featured. Our guest today is Harvey J. Austin, who is the SFP and head of Bold Sky Content Production. With over 25 years of experience in video and broadcast production for advertising and PR, live events, and experimental design, Harvey's extensive industry knowledge encompasses diverse roles from network news to all aspects of industrial and commercial production. At Bold Sky Creative Studio, he spearheads the production team, ensuring the development and delivery of compelling content from initial concept through final execution. Throughout his career, Harvey has collaborated with renowned brands across various sectors, including healthcare, retail, and entertainment. His notable clients include Victoria's Secret, Disney, Pfizer, Coca-Cola, and Viacom. Beyond his professional achievements, Harvey is deeply committed to fostering growth and mentorship within the creative community. He actively serves as an advocate and professional liaison for several creative mentorship associations, charitable arts organizations, and social and human justice initiatives. And those points are really going to be important as we go into this conversation. It was a delight having Harvey on the show, and I really think this is a special episode. So let's get into it. Hey everyone. Again, today we are joined by Harvey Austin. Hello, Harvey. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much. Glad to be here.
Awesome. And of course, Matt is here as well. Welcome back, Matt.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
I think, Matt, if you want to give Harvey a little bit of an introduction as well here, because you two have a little bit of history, which is great.
We do. Yeah. Me and Harvey have known each other for a few years now, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was just telling Shelby that when I first got to Columbus, I think you were one of the first people to kind of give me a little bit of an opportunity on some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And just always appreciated that and a lot of the conversations we've had. I think you've done a really amazing job of building a team and navigating a lot of stuff that, I don't know, just is really challenging to be able to do all that stuff. So I've always been really fascinated in having these conversations with you. So I guess to start, I would love to hear just the brief version of kind of how you got to where you are right now.
So thank you again for introduction. Obviously, thank you for this time. So I actually started my career in news, but I always had a love for just design and creativity, video specific and production. And just, after college, coming to Columbus and getting started in the actual business theater production, producing graphics and imagery for video and motion, but primarily for business theater. And then honestly, I had a situation in my life with a family member where how I got into really pharmaceutical healthcare advertising, where they were dealing with breast cancer. And at that point in time, it was probably, I think, around 99, 2000, 2001. I didn't realize, blockbuster drugs. I didn't really realize that was a thing you could actually get into and make videos and design for. And so it just really propelled me from that perspective. And so I've always found that love since then, and being able to be in production, specifically content production and design, but from a healthcare wellness perspective. And that's really been beneficial to me within Cineos Health, where I work now. And just being able to start there as honestly a video editor designer, and then grow my department to be able to take on animators, directors, videographers, to work towards healthcare and wellness across the board within content production.
Right. So through all of this stuff, I know that, I guess just speaking from my own experience, this is not an industry where you see a whole lot of people of color.
Right.
And I know that you probably have a lot of thoughts on that, but I'm just curious, like how it was for you, just kind of finding your way through all this stuff.
Yeah, so to your point, there are not a lot of people of color, and honestly, over the past 4 to 5 years, with all of the things that have gone on as far as diversity, inclusion, bringing people in from different backgrounds, the numbers have actually gone opposite direction. A lot of people don't really realize that all the work that we do to try to expose the industry is actually going down, but um, I didn't have anyone who per se looked like me when I was studying, getting into this industry. And so it's just really important for me to be an advocate and a conduit in the industry now to help those who don't really have an understanding or underrepresented as far as when it comes to advertising and production. I can say that I've had a lot of allies throughout my career, and that's a blessing because that's not always the case. But I have truly had a lot of allies who helped to get me into positions, and then I feel like it's honestly and without respect my responsibility to do the same. And so, I practice that as much as I can. I wasn't always as I'll say bold and an advocate because honestly, I was afraid. I was afraid to be pointed out. I was afraid I would have a target on my back, and I was afraid to speak up. But as I've been able to grow in my career, I see it as my responsibility to to be an example, so the ones coming up after me don't have to have that same fear. Because in the advertising industry, we promote and advertise to such a diverse world, and those decisions that are being made at the tables when it comes to the marketing and advertising and messages that are being put out, you have to have a diverse voice to be able to speak to people in the way that it needs to be. And it has to be an authentic voice, not just for money and numbers, but a true understanding of what the culture that you're advertising to is really looking for from a stance of being validated, in who they are.
Yeah, I do want to touch too on, because that's something that I think about a lot, and even not as a person of color, but a woman in film,
Right.
especially on that
Hmm.
side. It's
Right.
really a strange space to be in, of like, how much do you say? What is appropriate? What can I
Right.
say? What is my most authentic voice? And especially
Right.
when you're just getting started off in your career, it's,
Hmm.
can I
Right.
really push this right now, or do I need to fear
Right.
this space? And it's
Right.
really, I think, very inspiring for you to be able to say, okay, well, I've been in this, I've been doing this for many
Hmm.
years, and I can
Hmm.
start speaking up. I can really represent
Right.
this space, and I can be in these
Right.
spaces and share it and really have a voice. And
Hmm.
I do wonder too, kind of getting into some of those aspects of communication in health and pharmaceutical marketing. Do you think that diversity and having that really authentic voice is an overlooked area?
Yeah, it definitely has been for many years an overlooked area, especially when it comes to healthcare and wellness, because there are certain diseases and certain health issues that affect specific communities. And for many years, when you talk clinical trials, at least clinical trials didn't take the time to really look deep and bring in patients who were in the community to test different therapies and drugs. And so those communities are overlooked, and the disease states and the issues within the communities from a health care and wellness perspective just continue to grow with no real action or no real care. So you have to look at a subset of a community. But then it also goes back to a lot of the things that have been done in the history of testing of drugs and testing of therapies on certain communities, that causes a level of mistrust. And so, in this day and age, when we have the ability to speak up, we have to be encouraging to say, hey, we know we have to acknowledge what has happened in the past, but then come forward and say, we're going to make a definite mark to try to change that so that we can help the communities become healthier in the ways that we need to, and develop different therapies and drugs that are actually beneficial to those communities, and then take them to market and market to those communities for a better way of life. And so it goes hand in hand. It's the development of those therapies, having them tested and actually, seeing the results and then taking them to market and making sure that those communities are being able to receive the care that they need. And that's even from a stance of, promoting to HCPs and physicians directly of how they need to be able to work with different communities and subsets of people to have that trust be formed, because that's a huge part of it, trust. And just as anything else, if you don't really trust a situation or trust a scenario, you're just going to be more reluctant to even step into it, and it could be something that is extremely beneficial for you. But from a feeling and an internal perspective, if you don't have that trust, it's not going to go anywhere.
Right. One of the things that you said that I guess I think about this almost on a daily basis, but I don't really think of it this way. And it's that anytime that we are creating content,
Mm-hmm.
we must be able to find a way to feel it. We must be able to find a way to connect with it ourselves if we are going to tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many different things that that everyone in advertising
Mm-hmm.
has faced, where they're like, okay, I don't understand this thing, but I can get behind it. But like, how do I find a way to relate to this stuff? Right. And like, you even said it yourself, like, okay, well, a family member had breast cancer, and that like, when you have things like that happen to yourself, like you find a way to connect with so much of this stuff.
Right.
So I guess what I'm wondering is when something, when a project of some kind gets started, I mean, how do you, I don't know, I guess, like, how do you sort of communicate with your team internally for like, okay, here is this product, here is what this thing does, here is how we can really relate to this. Like, how do we speak to this thing kind of authentically?
Yeah. I mean, so, in content production, because my team is responsible for, taking whatever big idea is put out and basically putting it into motion, capturing it through camera, video editing, production. But you really have to look at it from a perspective of, we're all asked to to be involved in things that don't necessarily relate to us. But in my understanding of that, that's why it's so important to have a diverse group of individuals that you are involved with, because it may not connect with you initially, but you have someone in your circle that it does, and so you have that understanding of empathy, so that you can either go to them and get information from them, or you can bank it off of experience and things that about that person. So that's when I say diversity really truly matters, because it may not always relate directly to you, and that's fine. But you have to have enough of an open mind to be able to say, okay, I have intentionally broadened my circle outside of what is comfortable for me, especially when we're in a communications and content development industry, and that's what you do for your daily job, so that you can honestly be able to at least begin to relate to the broader audience.
Yeah, I really love that, because it I don't like it. We put a piece of ourselves in everything that we make. Right. And I think that as much as like clients in general don't want that to be like said like that, like that's the truth of it. We are creating stuff. We have no choice but to put ourselves into it. I just think that's really cool. Go ahead, Shelby.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, like, this is why I really push to have so many different voices in the room, because even if, I mean, like, as you're saying, is even if you can have some sort of connection, and even if you don't, I mean, if you have basic empathy, that's fine and that's great. But also having somebody there that really has experienced this, that knows the community, that has people that are actively around them that have gone through these things, it is so important. I mean, I think even just, I mean, it was recent that we didn't get to see, like certain skin diseases on darker skin, just because there was nobody in the room to say that this needs to be seen, that communities need to be able to see this, the doctors need to be able to see this. And we wouldn't have had that if those voices weren't in the room advocating for that.
Right. I mean, here just recently we've started, and this is just within the last 3 to 4 years, we are finally getting illustrations, medical illustrations of
Yeah.
non-white babies and women who are pregnant and different things that medical students need to study when they're in college because they're going to be, you know, these are going to be their patients when they graduate and start actually taking care of people in the medical field. So it's you think about how far we are really advanced as a people, but then you can also look and see, wow, there are some key things, especially when it comes to advertising, communications, and marketing, where we're really just uncovering, and bringing things out in the open and starting to actually deal with them and make the true changes. I remember I was a junior designer when I first moved to Columbus, and I was working for a client, and we were producing some materials, and this was in early 2000s, and there was the American, or I guess the rollout for the United States. We were also rolling it out for Hispanic community, and I just remember being in the room, and the only thing that was changed was it was changed from English to Spanish. All the imagery, all of the visuals, all of the layout, everything else was left the same. And the leaders at the table said, we just need to change this to Spanish, get this out. And that was it. And I remember sitting there thinking, that really is not going to, that it shouldn't be that way. But as a junior designer, and I'll go back to what I said earlier, I was like, well, I don't know if I should say anything, because then what might happen? And so I just really truly am passionate about making sure that others don't have to feel that way, because it's a true feeling. Because the reality of it is, that's your job, that's your income, you have family, you have different things you need to take care of, and you just don't want to be in that position to think, I can't speak up for what I know is really just really truly common sense, because I may sacrifice, a lot of other things that I just don't know if I'm able and really and honestly courageous enough to do that right now.
Right. I think that it's interesting for me because I mean, as a white male, things are obviously different, right? I'm
Hmm.
from very rural area in Ohio, and a lot of this conversation didn't really start for me until like college, really.
Hmm.
And it was like it's just this kind of eye-opening thing, like, oh yeah, of course. Like like I don't know, it made sense for
Right.
me at the time, but it's like, oh, it's because it was
Right.
made for me. And
Right.
like
Right.
it's
Right. Right.
just it's
Right. Right.
interesting.
Right.
But I guess I'm just curious now. So like going into like some of my early jobs,
Hmm.
it was, people were talking about it. Like so it's been,
Hmm.
I don't know, at least 10, 15 years now where this
Right.
conversation of inclusion, diversity, and the content that we're creating has been talked about. But I feel like initially it was talked about in a different way. Even with me, it was like, okay, it wasn't this conversation. It
Hmm.
was, okay, can we just make the skin of this character blue
Hmm.
or something so that
Right.
we're not trying to talk to
Right.
just one,
Right.
ethnicity here. So
Right.
like when it comes to stuff like that, I guess I'm just kind of curious about any of those common misconceptions over these last 10, 15 years and how you see that conversation should be taking place instead.
I mean, it definitely has grown, and it's much more of an open conversation, and it's much more of a received conversation in many areas. The thing about it is, the more the conversation elevates, I feel, from a stance of being open, the industry as a whole still struggles to have a large percentage of diverse individuals at the table when decisions are being made. And that's just across the board. That includes women, Black, Asian, Latinx. I mean, that includes everyone. And so I'm definitely happy that the conversation and the understanding of it is there, but I'm also um, disappointed that the the change at the table of the decision making, and I guess you could say the actual um, final answer is really not much different than what it was when the conversation became a hot topic. A lot of things from a DEI perspective have been shifted backwards since 4 or 5 years ago. And so it's a situation of we still have to keep having a conversation, but we can't sit back and say, okay, well, we're having a conversation. Everything is now completely turned around and it's all good. It's going to be a constant. And that's why I say we have to make it a standard versus just an option, so that it's not something that we're looking to say, okay, well, what about this? But it's like, no, this is it.
Right. I think that initially that conversation, it almost seemed like it started because people didn't want to like get in trouble almost.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They didn't see the value. Right. Exactly. We talked about what to do and what not to do. The value is completely missed. Right. And that's what I think is a really interesting thing about how you look at this, is that you talk about it from a value perspective. It's not about just this checklist of things to make sure to do, right? Yeah. I just think that's great.
Yeah, it's valuable from a stance of just, from a ethics and morality stance, but then it's also extremely valuable from a business perspective. Studies continue to show the amount of revenue that is missed or not gained from not having a diverse understanding and a diverse set of people making decisions when it comes to marketing, advertising, and media. Like the numbers don't lie when you break it down. But you have to determine in an organization, what's more important. Is it you can just let that revenue go and say, this is how we want to control things, or we're really going to take a stance, and gain that. Our clients that we work with at Cineos, several of our clients, they absolutely demand to know how we are working as far as within our organization from a diversity perspective. Who's on our teams? Who's going to be behind the scenes, promoting their product and their launch and their drugs? They want to know from a percentage and an actual numbers basis what's actually going on in our organization. And if we cannot prove that, they really and truly don't have a true understanding or desire to want to work with us, because they as a client understand this is very impactful. And I'm sure a lot of it deals with the numbers, but a lot of it also deals with the understanding that we live in a very diverse world, and it's only from a stance of human beings, it's only getting more diverse. Like it really truly is. So
I think flipping over to the audience's perspective of this and how they're kind of taking in this information. Healthcare always feels to me like, it's hard to access healthcare, but also from a perspective of understanding healthcare, it seems really, really inaccessible because it is big ideas and it's incredibly complicated, and at times feels very purposely complicated. So how do you approach, or like what are the common misconceptions of really being able to speak to a diverse audience that may feel like healthcare and pharmaceuticals are a really inaccessible industry to them?
I think one of the biggest thing is just not taking the time to ask the questions of the patients and the consumers. Like, what is it that could actually help you to understand this better? A lot of times we have study groups and focus groups, of course, but that doesn't always help to answer the question from a core perspective. It's more so like, would this ad speak to you in a way to make you ask your doctor for this particular drug? It might, because you might feel a certain way, with the disease that you have, but how does it actually make you feel as a person? And do you feel like you truly understand this, or that you just are being asked to put the trust in the physician to prescribe to you what is they feel is best for you? So I think a lot of times we just don't ask the overall questions of patients, from a ground level perspective. There's a recent study, and I have to do a little bit more research on it, but it said that ultimately 50% of HCPs or physicians aren't satisfied with pharmaceutical and healthcare advertising. So, that still shows us that we still have a lot of work to do, and ultimately that is going to go back to the patient because the physicians serve the patients, and you have the internet, you have a lot of different sources where patients go to get information. And a lot of times, it's just not clear. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we asking the right questions of the actual patients who are ultimately, our consumers?
Yeah, I love that. Harvey, before we let you go, I want to know, I mean, I know this is a conversation that I'd love to have, like at an hour long kind of thing. I think we're just scratching the surface on a lot of this stuff, but already I feel like this is like super helpful just to kind of hear a lot of that perspective that you have there, and
Mhm.
to hear about, again, the value of inclusion.
Mhm.
And it's funny because like we've had a few episodes already, and like this is a common thing that we keep on
Mhm.
hearing from people. And you're right. I think that the conversation is, I think it's really just kind of beginning still, and I think that we
Right.
have a long way to sort of go with that stuff. So,
Yeah.
um, so the last question that I have for you is, of all the projects that you've worked on, is there
Mhm.
one that stands out as being extra meaningful that you can
Mhm.
talk about?
I'll go back to my whole understanding and reasoning of like discovering pharmaceutical and healthcare advertising. Like I said, a family member of mine had breast cancer, and I was able to actually work on able to actually work on a production that focused on breast care health and advocacy for specifically for Black women, because even though breast cancer awareness is of course for men and women, but in general, more Black women are affected, and more Black women die, and then they also have less information that is, I guess, directed to them for even prevention, and then obviously when they're going through it. And so I was able to work on a production probably about, honestly, about 4 or 5 months into coming to Cineos. And so that was kind of like a divine moment for me. Like, okay, this is really where I'm supposed to be, because that's what opened my eyes to pharmaceutical and healthcare advertising as a whole. And then to be able to be involved intimately in that project from production all the way to post production. And at that point in time, I was a video editor, and I was given the assignment to edit the video. No one knew, about that from a communication stance, because I didn't, it's not something that I talked about. But that was a really fulfilling space for me, and I've been in this industry since 2003, and so it's been where I am. It's what I love from a stance of being able to actually advertise and promote from a healthcare perspective. I'm actually married to a physician, and so it all goes hand in hand ultimately when you look at it. And so that's really something that I draw on. Every time, I'm like, how do I feel about this? But I have to go back and I draw on that because it was really, truly, I consider it a divine moment for me.
Very cool.
Yeah,
It's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Harvey. I appreciate that.
for sure.
Well, I think we're going to head over to do our final thoughts. But before we do that, Harvey, thank you so much for being on the show, and giving us your insight. I think this is very eye-opening for a lot of people. And I
My
think,
pleasure.
I hope the audiences were really able to learn something and gain something from this conversation.
Yeah, I definitely have to give you all your props for just taking this as a platform and having these conversations, and pushing this forward and just being open about it, because it's really so much of this that's necessary and needed. So I applaud you for for staying on course and actually taking this on. So this is wonderful.
Don't make this about us, Harvey.
No, I just really appreciate that. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you so much.
yeah. Thank you.
Always love talking to Harvey. He's a good dude, and his story is cool. The way that just his overall perspective on a lot of things, I think is really insightful, really interesting. He is a mentor to so many in Columbus and in this kind of creative community. And yeah, he's always been a wind at my back, I feel like, if I can explain that in any way. So
Yeah, I really
yeah.
appreciated hearing his perspective and having him on, and especially his willingness to speak up and share his voice. I think is so important and really needed. So yeah, and this was our first time meeting, and I thought I had a great time with that conversation.
Yeah. Talking about things like inclusion and diversity, it's such a it used to be a really strange thing for me. Again, like, because I'm like, I just don't feel like I know much about it. And I don't know. I guess it came with starting to build a team where you start to see like, okay, yes, like having different perspectives is so important when you can see what it does to a team internally.
Yeah.
Even just the diversity of like where people are from, they bring whatever perspective they have with them.
Yeah.
And, truly, like, that's probably one of the big goals that I have, is to keep building that sort of team that it just has this diverse background, and where everybody can find a way to, I don't know, treat every project that we do like a personal project. I think that's kind of the secret goal that we have, is how do we find a way to make this a personal project? But yeah.
Yeah, I think this is the conversation of diversity is one that I really enjoy, and one I've been actively a part of for years. Because when I really came into the scene of like film and video, it was very, like, well, we don't want women in the scene. We don't want your voices heard. And it kind of just became a thing of, well, we don't have a choice. We've got to share this because the voice matters. And having multiple voices in the room really is important. So it is about when you're building that team, it's important to keep that in mind, of being very cognizant of it, because those voices do matter. And even if, it's like we have to put like something personal about ourselves, we have to have that authentic voice, like you're saying. And I think that's really something that we have focused on, is like having that personal touch. And it's really great to hear Harvey talk about that on like such a grand scale, with something like with healthcare, with pharmaceuticals, that's impacting so many people on such a personal level. Because I mean, like that, there's nothing more personal than your health, right? I mean, this is life and death. That's what this is. So to know that there are people actively working in those spaces, trying to communicate the best that they can by using a voice that somebody else can relate to, that shares a voice with other people, that you can really feel that, properly represented, is inspiring. It is, it's really comforting to know as well that there are people out there in spaces like that are really, really showcasing your voice as well. And I think that's something that really should be in all marketing, regardless of really what it is represent your audience, represent the people that you're speaking to. That's important. What does your audience want to hear? And are you actively speaking to them?
Right. I think that's something else that's always been kind of hard for people to see, is, I talked about like the value internally, but the value of being able to speak to your audience and show them, have a character that looks like them.
Yep.
I think is one of the coolest things that we can do from a communication standpoint.
Yep.
Not necessarily, again, not sit on the fence and just make the blue people because we don't want to offend anybody. Not that. No,
Yep.
Let's actually show the people who this is for, and, again, I think it's part of communication. Mm-hmm. A simple change of skin tones on a character can go a long way. And I'm not saying it's just that simple and just do that, but I'm saying that like even little steps like that, I think, can go an incredibly long way.
And I think too, if anybody wants to go back and listen to an older episode, they're not that old. The show's still new, but go back and listen to Chelsea Druso's episode with Provide, because we do talk about this a little bit, because we did, when we were working on a series with them, something that we talked about was being able to craft characters that really represent the people that they work with. And that means diverse characters. And something that they had was, they had doctors and vets coming up to them and saying, okay, well, thank you for representing us, because a lot of these other companies don't think about me and what I look like in this space. And I mean, it takes such little, really kind of seemingly little effort to just consider other people outside of maybe, what is considered the norm, or outside of what your voice and what your perspective is. It's just having more people in the room.
That's all I got.
That's all we got. Anyway, thank you all so much for listening. I hope that this was able to, help inform our audiences, and maybe, next time when you're starting that next project off, keeping that in mind as you're building your team. But all right. Thank you all so much for listening, and stay magical. Content Alchemy is presented by Made by Things. To learn more about us, check out madebythings.com. And if you have a topic you'd like us to discuss, send us a message at alchemy@madebythings.com.